Today I'm talking with Nick Jackson from a company called NotOnTheHighStreet.com, which is an e-commerce company in London, UK, I believe. And I listened to Nick speak at the Microservices Practitioners Summit last week and wanted to get some specific information from him on how things are working out in an e-commerce setting from a customer standpoint. So, we talk to vendors a lot, but this is a different take because this is somebody that actually is using all the tools. So it's very interesting to be able to hear that. Hi, Nick. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
Fantastic. So just to start, can you tell me what is NotOnTheHighStreet.com and what do you do there?
So we're an online marketplace. So we allow sort of local small UK small businesses, and we give them a platform to sell. So unlike somebody like eBay or Etsy, what we do is we're a curated marketplace. So we spend a lot of time looking at products which fit our brand, which are kind of cohesive to one another, and that's one of the things that's given us a lot of success, because when you go through our website and you look at things, everything feels very, like it belongs under the one umbrella. Whereas if you can go with someone like Etsy or even just sort of browsing through like eBay or sort of Amazon Marketplace, and it feels quite disparate, some of the brands. So we try to do that, and we spend a lot of time both giving a technological platform for the sellers, but also on the other side of the business, we're looking at marketing activities as well, where we will actually market their products under the Not on the High Street brand, and TV advertising, print-based advertising, online advertising, and all of those lovely things. And
Okay, great. And
so,
your role is?
so I'm an engineering evangelist. So I suppose looking at good patterns and practices, looking at the sort of things coming up in technology and how we can best apply them to serve both our customers and our business to ensure that we're giving the best solutions. I'm not a solution architect, so I don't sort of look too much on a high level scale. I'm more sort of concerned with how do we develop great code, how do we make sure things are of good quality and we can build and release and things like that quickly.
Okay. How large of a development team is there over there, if I can ask?
Yeah, we're quite big. I think between sort of 50 and 60 developers. So I say between because we have a little bit of flex from a contract perspective, but we're a reasonable sized company. In the UK, we're turning about 160 million pounds. So today's exchange rate, maybe 210, 220
yeah.
many dollars. So we're quite a large company. We do have international sales as well, but predominantly we're concentrating on our UK platform on growth, and then you'll see us expanding out internationally over the next few years.
Okay, so 50 to 60 developers. Now, how did you get involved in microservices? Why did you think that this was, and just if you can walk me through that process over there.
So I think from my perspective, so I've been working in the industry for probably 20 years now. So I've seen a few different technologies. I kind of cut my teeth on SOA, and when you sort of moved away from one big monolith to sort of many monoliths and sort of in a service-oriented architecture pattern, that was quite liberating from a developer's perspective, being able to sort of compartmentalize the particular function around an application. And microservice takes things to a whole nother level. It allows you to sort of really sort of draw a boundary around a particular piece of functionality. And when you're working in a large team, that's really advantageous because it means that you have quite a small code base that people are working on at any one time. So it makes things like deployments easier. It makes, merging and branching and things like that. Some of the sort of the common pain points that you feel when you're working in on a large monolith. It also allows you to be able to sort of deploy with a little bit more safety. I mean, you're deploying just a small component of your application as opposed to the whole thing. So when it comes to doing like the regression testing around what's being deployed, that again has got a much smaller footprint. So it feels a lot better from a developer standpoint. It's a much more enjoyable way to work, I think.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, the other thing that for me, as from a business standpoint, is really important is that it really increases the pace of innovation. And that
Yeah.
is a major benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we were just looking at recently is how we could potentially use machine learning and things like that. And the benefit of working in a microservice environment is that we can actually spin up a very small part of our stack. We can concentrate and focus on that. And then when we want to integrate that into the rest of the system, it can be done quite painlessly. In fact, we can, even do things like we can have the sort of an old algorithm and a new algorithm, and they can be running in parallel, and we can actually be doing some A/B testing through that, which is, I mean, it's all possible with a monolithic architecture, but certainly it's a lot more complicated, especially when you're sort of removed from the freedom of choice of language. And I think that's another big thing. So I'm a polyglot programmer. I can program in a bunch of different languages, and having that sort of flexibility to be able to choose the best, not just the best framework, but the sort of the best language for the job. So if you're doing a lot of data stuff, maybe you want to choose Python, whereas the majority of your application developers may not be Python developers. They may be Java developers or Ruby developers. You've got that flexibility, whereas if you're working in a big monolithic application and somebody says, hey, I want to write this bit of code in Python, well, it's not going to happen. So
Yeah, it's not going to happen. So now, what is it specifically that you think microservices would benefit people in retail or commerce? Is there
retail,
anything specific?
yeah, I mean, totally. So retail is a really interesting area because when you look at the demand that's placed on a system around retail, it can be incredibly spiky. So you'll find that because of the way that the conversion funnel works, you're getting the bulk of your traffic through to your sort of your front end, your presentation layers, basically your website or your apps, and then your data services. But then you have much lighter load coming through to things like the payment and checkout flow, or other areas of the system. So by working in microservices, what it allows you to do is it allows you to scale the various bits of the system depending on the demand that's placed upon them. And you can do that so much more efficiently and effectively than if you were scaling a monolith where you've basically got to scale everything. So given an example around last year and some of the activity we had around Black Friday, and we were doing a lot of marketing, we had an advert that was going out. We could actually scale the front end of the system with a couple of clicks in AWS and in Marathon, and that would give us the demand that we needed to satisfy the browsing across those adverts. We could have done that with a monolith as well, but it would have been so much more costly because we would have needed a lot more machinery when actually you're only using a small sort of portion of it. Mm-hmm. And likewise with it gives you the capability around, say we're sending out a big email campaign, then we can just scale the emailing portion of the application stack rather than having to sort of scale everything.
Right, right. So yeah, I mean, retail and e-commerce, of course, is probably one of the top innovations in the web era, and it's been most impacting retail. So retail is like severely under pressure to innovate. You know, for retailers, especially brick and mortar retailers these days, more and more, innovation is a part of their core business now. It's not an option anymore. So that's why I think this concept of microservices and the freedom, the additional freedom to be able to try different things, measure and improve quickly is going to be like a part of like a life and death situation almost. If you can't do that, you're going to be have a very hard time staying in
Yeah,
business.
it's I mean it's absolutely essential. I mean, the thing that's really interesting about what the internet can do for business is most dramatic when you look at the likes of startups. So Amazon, which is probably the biggest internet retailer, maybe Baidu and sort of China, but they've came from nothing in like 20 years.
Right.
Now, you sort of look at, certainly in the United Kingdom, and I think in the States as well, you've got some established retail chains which have been around for 100, 150 years. They could like literally be irrelevant within 20 years. So if they don't sort of adapt, and if they don't sort of innovate and keep track with these smaller businesses, then the history has told us that you can go from zero revenue to tens and tens of billions of revenue in 20 years if you've got the right idea and the right desire.
Right. Yeah, so I think it definitely makes sense for anybody that's in retail to start investigating microservices. Now, what was the process? Now, did you start? I'm assuming you started probably from a monolith over there, and
Yeah,
then you transition. What was that process like?
that's really challenging, to be brutally honest with you. We still have a vast proportion of our monolith, and that's going to be an ongoing process to break that down over probably the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, our business is 10 years old, and that monolith is almost as old as the business, and it's just been like built on and built on and built on.
Just wondering, is that something that you share with people publicly? What platform you're using, if you can
Yeah,
tell
we
us?
we use Ruby on Rails.
Okay.
So we Ruby on Rails for our monolith. We also build stuff out in Java, Spring Boot. We're building some stuff in Node.js for our new front end, which will come online later this year. We will also work in Google Go and Swift. So we're like a truly polyglot team.
So when you
There's
say monolith, you're not referring necessarily to a quote unquote, like let's say an IBM or Oracle backend.
very, I mean, very similar. So rather than sort of having like WCS or something like that, we've actually built our own e-commerce platform in Ruby on Rails, and that was like an evolutionary process through the growth of the company. So what we do is quite bespoke from a perspective that we have products, but we also have like our partners. So we need very sort of specialist management tools, which doesn't really sort of fit the mold of like Magento or WCS or something like that. So we built our own platform, which has evolved over the years, and that's currently what we're sort of trying to break down. And I think what's interesting is that the other affordability that you have with microservices means that you don't have to just buy. Actually, you don't have to just build yourself. So, like when we're looking at our strategy now, we're looking and saying, well, we want to buy before we build. So if somebody has a product out on the market which does what we want to do, and they maintain it, and we can integrate with it, then that's great for us, because then we can concentrate on the things that give us the unique selling point, the things that make us bespoke. So people like IBM who are producing like a core econ platform, then that's great. You can still integrate with that. I think the key thing is a lot of things that I see mistake wise is when people try to too heavily customize a lot of software.
Right. So you're talking about, for example, taking the commerce backend from a traditional, platform and just using that as a service.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you can have like those. We've looked at that, and the current piece of work we're looking at is a product information management system, and to replace the one that we have built bespoke. So we will most likely go and buy something. We'll find something that fits our requirements, which has really good integration, and we'll probably just go and buy something like that, or we'll find an open source product or like an enterprise open source product which fits our needs, and then we'll concentrate our sort of efforts more so on as I say, the uniquely innovative or creative areas, which wouldn't necessarily something you could buy, something you have to build because it's something that's very bespoke to you as you're offering.
Okay. So this is an important point because when some people think about monoliths, they automatically think about traditional platforms. But a monolith can be something that you built yourself 10 years
Yeah.
ago.
Oh yeah,
So,
100%.
yeah.
I mean,
So
it's really easy to do,
it's just a
and
definition. Yeah.
yeah, but as I say, I think it's monoliths as themselves are not inherently bad. There's plenty of companies which are very successful with monolithic architecture. It I think you've got to be very disciplined in building really good code bases and having really good patterns and practices around managing and maintaining that code. But yeah, for us, I think we've been running with microservices about 18 months now, and there's very little that would make us want to change. And in fact, we're even looking at things like serverless, which is like nano services, and sort of evaluating whether this is an interesting approach.
Okay, so going back to how the transition was, sorry, I took you away from that discussion. You were saying that it was a challenge, but I'm assuming it's harder in the beginning.
Yes, because you've kind of got to get the processes right. So I mean, I think the technology is invariably not going to be your biggest problem. Sort of people and processes are always going to be the sort of the biggest problem, because you've got to look at skills and skills gaps, but you've also got to look at ways of working, and be very disciplined as a team to follow a sort of a set pattern for working. Otherwise, it's all too easy just to continue on with the monolithic development. And one of the things as well is that as a business, certainly as our business, we can't afford just to spin up an entire new team which is going to be building greenfield. We need to deliver business value and new business value, as well as to for our existing custom. So to just say, well, we're going to rebuild a brand new system and then we're going to put it online is an absolute non-starter. So we're working on the existing code base, adding functionality on a very minimal scale, whilst we're trying to sort of chip
Okay.
blocks away from it.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I've heard most people are doing is really just starting with what they have and then continuously just slowly adding to it and chipping away, just like you said. Now, that takes me to my next question. Um, to People I talk to mostly say that it makes sense to start using microservices when you get to a certain size of a team. My
Yeah.
question is what is the reason for that specifically? And do you think having the new tools that are being built by companies such as like DataWire is going to help so that teams of one or two people just can get start on the right foot?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case, and I think there was with microservices there was always an amount of stuff that you needed to support them. So you need things like orchestration and service discovery, but those problems are very slowly being sort of solved, and within the next 12 months, I think we'll see them completely gone. We've got companies like DataWire, which is solving service discovery. We've got Docker and looking at their paid offerings with Docker Cloud around orchestration, and Google launched Google Container Service, and Amazon keeps improving its offering around the AWS Container Service. And again, Microsoft as well. Microsoft are doing some great stuff with Azure, and then they're running Mesosphere. I think it's DCOS they have in Azure. So I don't think it's so much of a problem. I think personally, I build any code that I'm writing for myself. I work in a microservice model. I wouldn't even particularly consider building sort of monolithic applications, because I think if you've got the tooling, then it really isn't a problem at all. And I think the advice where people say, okay, so you should build, only move to microservices if you've got a large team, then I think it's generally based on the fact that the tooling wasn't very good, and there was an element of manual sort of administration around that. But I don't think that's a problem anymore. I think literally a single individual can build using microservice patterns, and I also think that applies to a lot of sort of when you're looking at startups, and the argument around startups is just build a monolith, work out where your custom is going to come from, where your USP is, and what your product is actually going to be before you start thinking about scale. But for me, microservices are not just about scale. They're predominantly about change. And I think, if a startup is thinking in terms of this sort of modular decomposition of their application stack from the very beginning, that'll really help them to accelerate their growth.
Right. Yeah, I remember many years ago, I don't remember when exactly, in the 2000s, the concept of mashups or meshups,
Yeah, absolutely.
which is similar. Like, take the different services and mash them together and
Yeah, totally.
do what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the nice things, right? So, if you are a startup, if you need a CMS, then there's companies out there which provide CMS as a service, a hosted service. There's companies which like Molten, which will provide you with a complete sort of back-end API checkout basket, which is amazing. So if you kind of pre-think in those terms, you can actually do a lot of very rapid development just by gluing different bits of pieces together. And it actually gives you a really good sort of basis and a platform to build on as you do grow and as your system does become more complex.
So one of the I guess concerns that I have as a owner myself is, okay, I have like these 20 different services that I'm using from outside my company, and if any one of them goes down or it starts to lag, it's going to impact my business. How do you handle that? How do you reduce the risk on that?
So I think it's difficult. I mean, I think by loosely coupling services, that's a really important thing to do, so that if need be, you can bring in another service provider. I think more often than not, we see more problems with our own systems than we do with the third parties. I think if you choose the right company and the right partner, then you'll probably be okay. I mean, there's some really sort of smart people building out, and they've got the economies of scale as well. So, they've got, especially on the multi-tenanted platforms, they're pretty good. I think
Right. So I think,
It's
yeah, sorry, like even Amazon, AWS can go out
yeah,
and
absolutely,
it
and
can bring down the, the whole thing. But that's like, it's the chances of that happening are really decreasing rapidly.
yeah, it's minimal. I mean, as I say, if we look at the statistics of outages, we've probably had more downtime in the last 12 months, which has been caused by our own deployments and our own code base than even the likes of sort of the big AWS outages, which they do happen from time to time. But I think you've got to, if you think loosely coupled, if you think very modular, then you've got a lot of options. And again, it's like cost against risk. Okay, so if it's going to cost you £1 billion to be down for an hour, then you want to be spending some serious money to make sure that that isn't going to happen. But if if you're only going to lose like a few thousand, even tens of thousands for being out for an hour, and you're only going to be out for an hour every 12 months, then it can be incredibly costly to have redundancy. So I think you've just got to weigh up the risk, weigh up the balances, and be smart around how you think about how your application is going to work. So think about things like graceful failure. Always design for failure in a microservice environment. Assume that things are not going to be available and that you're handling that gracefully, which will dramatically reduce the impact.
Right. Okay. Now, talking about stacks, I'm trying to start to build a sort of like a database myself of all the different stacks that people use. Would you mind sharing with me what is the current stack that you use, including what is for like microservices, tools for that?
Yeah. So I suppose we're Ruby on Rails, Rails API. We use pretty much everything's hosted in AWS. So we use MySQL from a database perspective. We use the hosted RDS version of MySQL. Elasticsearch, which is an incredible product. I don't think we've got any NoSQL data stores online at the moment, but we will use things like Redis for caching objects and Memcache. What other stuff we got going on in there? That's probably the main sort of the
As far as
main
front
bulk.
end, what about front end?
So front end, our existing front end is being rewritten at the moment. So we're adopting React for that. So we'll be building out a bunch of front end services which will be available as just APIs or providing data to the website,
Okay.
and the website's going to be completely rewritten, and that'll be a sort of a very modular React based setup, which is going to be really cool. So that'll be, of course, we're designing mobile first because that's like 65% of our traffic. Obviously, HTML, CSS, we build our apps native because we believe that gives us the best performance from a user perspective, and we're going to sort of continue to do that.
I think
What
the
other stuff?
native apps work perfectly in that the MSA structure
Yeah,
because you're
um,
completely separating the back end and the front end and right.
I, yeah, absolutely, and that was the core problem we had when I was at Marks and Spencer, which is a big UK retailer. That the apps had problem to get at the data because everything was kind of designed around the website. Now, as any sort of, not even just an e-com, but a retailer, bricks and mortar generally will be multi-channel. So they'll have bricks and mortar, they'll have a website, they'll have some mobile apps, they'll have maybe a TV app, Apple TV app.
Hmm.
They might be doing some stuff with digital signage.
Watch, maybe watch even.
Yeah,
Yeah.
literally, if it can connect to it, like, I mean, soon I'm fairly sure that like our wardrobes are going to be connected to our favorite e-com stores and stuff. And
Right.
but having the capability of building things around a microservice architecture, having everything which is kind of API centric. So if there is data, the access to that data is only via an API. You sort of never couple data and presentation like you would have done in a sort of a traditional MVC stack. Then that affords you a massive flexibility and opportunity, because when a new product comes along, you're like, hey, well, that's okay because we've already got the data to be able to have it consumed from this. So if the next big thing is, I don't know, I can't think what the next big thing.
IoT maybe.
Yeah, I mean, IoT is a big one, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, Amazon are doing some really interesting stuff with their buttons, the reorder buttons. And whilst that feels a little bit gimmicky, then, that it's an interesting experiment, and it's something that they can do because they've got the access to those products through that sort of API layer. It's not like they have to do any work to get at the data. It's just there. I mean, Netflix, obviously not a retailer as such, but if you look at the way they built their systems, and a lot of microservice architecture is heavily influenced from the work that's been done in Netflix. They've done some fantastic engineering, and originally a lot of their product, their website and stuff like that, people weren't that interested, but they had public APIs, so people were doing like really interesting things with their public APIs. And that was one of the things that really gave them rose them up to sort of prominence. So it's, I think, just following that as a design ethos can give you the incidental benefits that you're not necessarily going after, but they don't cost you anything either. So it's well worth doing.
Right. Right. So I'm assuming that you're building up still the team and adding more members. What are the skill sets that you're currently looking for? I'm assuming you're hiring. Everybody's hiring that's growing. So
Yeah.
what are you hiring for?
So we're continuing with Rails and Ruby because we love that as a language, and we really want to keep supporting it. We're also hiring Java. We're hiring Go, so Google Golang. Swift, we've just done quite a bit of hiring around native apps, and also that team is going to be building out some of their own API services using Swift on the server. Python from a data science perspective. DevOps is a real sort of big deal as we sort of grow complexity in the system. We really need good operations
So what
people.
specific tools are you interested in DevOps?
So we're at the moment we're running Mesosphere, so Mesos, Marathon. People who've got knowledge of Docker. All of our services are containerized. People who've got knowledge of AWS and Ansible, which is a really sort of great sort of infrastructure tooling.
Right.
Trying to think. I think that's pretty much
That's a
where
pretty
we're
good,
at.
yeah, pretty good group there. Now, just are your team, is your team all local over there? Do they come to the office, or do you have like a distributed team, people in different parts of the world,
So
basically?
we don't so much. We have a couple of experiments. So we're doing an experiment with a team which is based out in Portugal, and they're looking at some of our sort of partner services. We're predominantly our engineering teams here in Richmond, in West London, but I think we'll look at that as we sort of grow, and we're not ruling anything out. I think it makes a lot of sense to have remote teams, co-located teams, even completely sort of home working teams. But the key thing as well about having a a cohesive team which is on site is from a cultural perspective. It's nice to be able to interact with people, and people that you might not work with on a day-to-day basis because you're not working on a product. Then you might not necessarily communicate with them outside of your sort of working, but the water cooler mentality, just it's quite a nice thing from a cultural perspective. So our main worry is that we would lose that if we went too dispersed with the team.
Right. Yeah, culture is very important, and of course, there's no better way to get into knowing people other than, I mean, even, what I see is that a lot of people are actually not even talking to each other anymore. It's all like text messages and Slack messages
Yeah.
and stuff, and even getting on the phone is becoming like a drag, which is really not good because you just cannot communicate completely with just text messages.
No, I mean communication is incredibly important, because through communication you're sort of spreading solutions, you're sharing, and in a fast-paced environment, and certainly in a sort of with not just with microservices but just technology in general, which is just seems to increase with speed like all of the time. It's fantastic to be able to have that sort of community where you can share ideas and share knowledge, and we do a lot of stuff with like book clubs and learning lunches and sort of just seminars and brown bags and things like that. And for me, that's really important. That's one of the things I really enjoy about sort of coming to work and learning from people. And I think I'd feel personally quite isolated if I was always at home and just kind of getting my knowledge from Hacker News rather than.
Right. Communicating with people, interfacing with people, actually. Great. Well, just one more question before I let you go. It's if somebody wanted to get started learning about microservices, what is your recommendation? What website, what books should they look at?
So I think there's three main books which I think are great. So I think Sam Newman's Building Microservices is a absolutely fantastic book, and I recommend everybody reads that. Not just sort of coders, but anybody who's working in that area. It's a really accessible book, and it's very very well written. Michael Nygaard's Release It is a little bit of an older book, but the things that he describes really, really sort of have stood the test of time. And like, we're only talking a couple of years, but seriously, the nice thing about Michael's book is that Michael sort of talks through some of the things that he's suffered with, and he's applying like, I had this problem, I created this, and here's the pattern that I used to solve it. That's a little bit more of a technical book, but it's still a really really good book, which I recommend anybody working in microservices reads. And probably the third book is a book that'll be coming out in February next year, and that's a book by a guy called Nick Jackson, and it's
All
called
right.
Building Microservices in Go.
Awesome.
And pretty much what I'm trying to do there is just put down a lot of the things that I've learned, and trying to sort of explain why things are done in this way, and just make it sort of accessible for people to kind of pick up the sort of the tricks, and that's going to save them a whole bunch of phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning when everything goes bang.
Right, right.
No.
Or any. So that's great. We can probably like pre-order that on Amazon right now, or how's that?
So it'll be coming out on Pact Publishing
Okay.
in February. So yeah, it'll be Safari Books. It'll probably be on Amazon as well, I think.
Okay,
I'm
I'll try to add some information in the notes on
oh
how to
it's,
people get it. Yeah, I think it's very important. How about maybe a couple of interesting blogs?
yeah. So actually, I really want to give a shout out to Daniel Bryant. who works for Open Credo. I think they're really doing some amazing stuff around sort of the work around microservices, and Daniel's always got something interesting to put forward. His talk at Microservice Summit as well was fascinating, more around sort of social problems. And but yeah, definitely recommend. I mean, literally just following Daniel on Twitter, and he also writes for InfoQ. InfoQ is a great source. There's some great stuff coming out there. CodeShip's blog is really good. They sort of aggregate a lot of stuff. But it's actually sort of quite high quality reading. Where else? What else am I thinking? Hacker News is always just avoid the comments and
All right. Yeah, I definitely
and
wanted
Martin
to.
Fowler, obviously.
Okay, right. Yeah, I listened to Daniel's talk last week and definitely want to touch base with him. I think it was fascinating what he's doing. Well, thank.
Daniel and Open Credo have done some really good work in the retail space. So they've been working with a huge retailer, supermarket, Sainsbury's in the United Kingdom. And Sainsbury's are doing some very interesting digital transformation around microservices as well. So
Okay,
I'm sure.
interesting. That's good to know. Well, thank you so much. This was really interesting, and I hope that I can, steal you from your other work. Hopefully, in the next few months again, and get an update from you, and find out when the book is going to be published.
That would be an absolute pleasure of mine. I've got quite a tight schedule on that, so it's gonna happen. I should have finished the last chapter by the end of November, and then
Now you're
I'm
on
just
record. It's like everybody's gonna know
yeah.
about it.
Oh, I'm worse than on record. I'm contractually bound. It's
Okay.
I got
Awesome.
legal problems more than anything.
I'm sure it'll come out on time and it's going to be very interesting. So awesome. Well, thank you so much. Have a great weekend,
Brilliant,
and
and you.
we'll talk to you later.
Great.
Take
Thanks so
care.
much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.